Malik's fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack as the lecture hall echoed with laughter. Not the good kind, the cruel kind, sharp and jagged like broken glass. It came from the back row, where a group of upperclassmen huddled, smirking over their laptops. Someone had just whispered, "Who let 7 Mile in here?" And then louder. "Bro really just said that like he understood the question." More laughter. Malik stared down at his notebook, the words on the page blurring into each other. His voice, still shaky from the question he tried to answer, echoed in his head, too slow, too uncertain. Professor Whitaker didn't say much. The man just gave that tiny nod he reserved for the hopelessly incorrect and turned back to the board, white chalk screeching against green as he continued explaining the theorem named after himself, Whitaker's vector convergence postulate, supposedly bulletproof. But Malik couldn't unsee it. That little crack in logic. The quiet offness in the proof. He hadn't meant to speak up. But his hand moved before he could stop it. And now, here he was. First semester. First month. First real humiliation. Outside, Michigan's October wind scraped against the windows. Malik's eyes drifted to the world beyond the glass, gray clouds over gray buildings. Even the trees looked tired. The professor's voice continued droning, but Malik's mind had slipped somewhere else. Back home. Detroit. 7 Mile Road. One long stretch of cracked pavement and louder dreams. He used to walk past boarded-up convenience stores and graffiti-covered bus stops, headphones in, drowning out the chaos. His mother always warned him, "Don't walk like you got something they can take." But he did. He had something they couldn't see, numbers. He saw patterns in the sky, in license plates, in the way people talked over each other on the subway. But no one cared. His 10th grade math teacher once accused him of cheating after he solved an advanced calculus problem in his head. That same week, he'd gotten jumped by 3 guys for carrying a graphing calculator in his backpack. "Too smart for your own good," one had said before knocking him to the ground. So he stopped raising his hand. He learned to stay small. Until now. Class dismissed, Professor Whitaker said, barely glancing at the room full of students who were already halfway out the door. The man was a legend. A Fields Medal finalist. His textbook was used at MIT, Princeton, and Stanford. Being in his class was supposed to be an honor. Instead, it felt like a courtroom. Malik packed up slowly, trying to wait until the crowd thinned. But as he reached the door, someone shoulder-checked him hard on the way out. "Yo, you really think you're smarter than Whitaker?" a voice sneered. Malik didn't respond. He just kept walking. By the time he stepped outside, the wind slapped him back to reality. He zipped his hoodie and started down the long campus path toward the bus stop. Unlike most of the kids here, he didn't have a car, or a fancy bike, or a dorm room with a view. His scholarship covered tuition and books, not housing. So every day, he took 2 buses and walked 15 blocks to a shared rental apartment with cracked walls and loud neighbors. He checked his phone. 3:18 p.m. The 3:20 would be packed. As he sat on the bench, trying to ignore the ache in his stomach from skipping lunch again, a notification popped up, Campus Forum, Freshman challenges professor in class, followed by a laughing emoji and 27 comments. He opened it. His name wasn't in the post, but it didn't need to be. This is why diversity quotas are a joke. LMAO, someone tell him this isn't YouTube University. He really thought he found something no one else did in 20 years. Face with tears of joy. Malik put the phone away. The bus pulled up with a hiss. As he stepped on, someone from class, a white guy with a Patagonia vest, smirked at him from the back. The bus rocked gently as it rolled through the city. Malik stared out the window. Trash blew across empty sidewalks. Kids played basketball with a deflated ball in a broken park. A woman argued with someone on speakerphone. It was the same city, but it looked different now that he had one foot in another world. That's what college had felt like so far, one foot in, one foot out. On the inside, lectures, dining halls, office hours, brilliant minds from around the world. On the outside, home, where the walls were thin, the jobs were gone, and even the streetlights gave up after midnight. Sometimes he wondered if this whole thing was a mistake. He got off at 7 Mile and trudged 3 blocks past liquor stores, check-cashing joints, and a church with a "Revival this Sunday" sign hanging crooked on the fence. Finally, he reached the duplex he shared with 2 other scholarship students. The stairs creaked. The heat didn't work. But it was his. That night, Malik sat at his desk, staring at the pages of Whitaker's proof. He'd printed them out on the library printer, single-sided, margin notes scribbled in black pen. He didn't know what made him do it. He just knew something felt wrong. A small assumption in the base case that had been glossed over. Not technically incorrect, but incomplete. He circled it again. Maybe he really was dumb. Maybe they were all right. Maybe what he'd found wasn't a flaw, just a misunderstanding from a kid out of his depth. But then again. His hand hovered over the page. What if I'm not wrong? Downstairs, music thumped through the walls. Someone was making cup noodles in the shared kitchen. The world kept spinning. But up here, Malik leaned back in his chair and whispered something to himself he hadn't dared say out loud in a long time. I think I see something they don't. Clapperboard, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Malik was 5 the first time he saw someone die. It wasn't dramatic, no gunfire, no shouting. Just a man on the curb outside the corner store, slumped over with a needle still hanging from his arm. His grandma pulled him close, shielding his eyes with one hand and clutching a bag of groceries in the other. You don't need to see that, baby, she whispered. That ain't your future. But Malik had seen it. He saw everything, even when people thought he wasn't paying attention. He saw how hard his grandma worked, how her hands stayed raw from cleaning houses 6 days a week. He saw how his mom came home bone-tired from the night shift at the nursing home and still found time to check his homework. He saw how the world kept telling them they weren't enough, and how they kept pushing anyway. Their apartment had 2 bedrooms and 4 people. Malik shared a room with his cousin Dion, who was more interested in freestyle battles than school. The floor creaked when you walked. In the winter, the pipes knocked like someone trying to get in. On the worst nights, they boiled water on the stove just to stay warm. But inside Malik's mind, there was another world, clean, ordered, full of patterns and logic. While other kids were learning multiplication, he was teaching himself algebra from a workbook he found at the library. Not because someone told him to. Because it made sense. Numbers didn't lie to you. People did. His first memory of feeling different wasn't about race or money. It was about numbers. He was in 2nd grade when he figured out how to multiply double digits in his head. He told his teacher, Mrs. Adams, and she smiled like he was cute, not serious. So he showed her. Did it in front of the class. She didn't smile after that. Instead, she asked to speak to his mother after school. Malik waited outside the office, his knees bouncing, unsure if he was in trouble. He could hear them talking through the door. He's bright, no doubt, Mrs. Adams said. But maybe too focused on the wrong things. His mother's voice was tired but sharp. Wrong things like what? Math? Too advanced, too fast. He needs to slow down. Let the other kids catch up. Malik never forgot those words. By middle school, he knew how to hide. He still did the work, still aced every test. But he stopped raising his hand. Let others answer questions he already knew. Played dumb when the teacher gave a pop quiz, then turned in perfect homework the next day. That way, no one noticed. Until high school. That's when Ms. Carson walked into his life, a wiry, relentless woman who taught AP math like it was a contact sport. She spotted Malik the first week of 9th grade, solving a bonus question on the board no one else even attempted. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked, squinting. He shrugged. "Just, figured it out." Ms. Carson didn't smile. She narrowed her eyes like she was studying a puzzle. Then she handed him a book. Principles of Mathematical Logic. College level. Heavy. "Let's see what you can really do," she said. For the first time, someone pushed him instead of pulling him back. Ms. Carson stayed after class with him. Entered him in local math tournaments. Helped him apply for summer STEM programs. She was relentless, yes, but she saw something in him even he had started to doubt. Then came the acceptance letter, Bright Futures University, full scholarship. He stared at the email on the school computer for a long time. His hands shook. Ms. Carson clapped him on the back. "You're getting out, Malik. You earned it." His mom cried when she saw the letter. "I can't help you with none of this college stuff," she said, wiping her eyes. "But your grandma would have been proud." Malik packed one duffel bag. That's all he had. He left behind cracked sidewalks and sirens in the night. He left behind Dion, who was already skipping classes and chasing street dreams. He left behind his mother, who stood at the bus station holding a brown paper bag full of snacks and a handwritten note he wouldn't read until 2 weeks later. "Don't let nobody tell you you're less than. Love always, Mama." But Bright Futures didn't feel like a future at first. It felt like walking into a movie he didn't have the script for. The dorms were tall and glassy, like office buildings. The lawns were trimmed like golf courses. Students wore sweaters with names like Chad and Caitlin stitched on their bags. They talked fast and loud, quoted philosophers he'd never heard of, and assumed he was from the South Side, even though Detroit wasn't south of anything. He didn't even live on campus. His scholarship didn't cover the dorms. Instead, he shared a room in a rundown house 15 blocks away, surrounded by international students and fellow low-income scholars who kept to themselves. Every day, he walked past the marble plaques and sculpture gardens to classrooms where no one looked like him. Where his voice always sounded a little out of place. Where the professors talked like their words cost money. Then came Professor Whitaker's class. It was supposed to be the highlight of his first semester. Advanced Theoretical Mathematics. Enrollment by approval only. Whitaker was a legend, even had a theorem named after him, something about convergence in non-Euclidean vector fields. The kind of work that made math sound like magic. Malik was thrilled. Until the third week. That's when the problem set landed in his lap like a dare. He'd stared at it for hours, chewing the end of his pencil. Something didn't sit right. The proof was too neat. Too perfect. A tiny assumption, buried in the base step, one that seemed to leap past logic into faith. He hesitated before raising his hand in class. Every instinct said don't. But something stronger said, you see it. Say something. So he did. And the laughter followed. Now, 3 weeks into his first semester, Malik found himself caught between two worlds again. Back home, he was the genius kid. Here, he was the mistake, the diversity pick, the imposter. But deep inside, that little voice whispered again, what if you're right? He pulled out the old workbook Ms. Carson had given him. Inside the back cover, she'd scribbled a note in red pen. Never forget, even when no one listens, the numbers do. He flipped to a fresh page, opened Whitaker's proof, and began again. The math building didn't look like much from the outside. Just glass and brick, like half the other academic halls at Bright Futures University. But inside, it felt like a museum, quiet, cold, sacred. High ceilings, polished floors, bulletin boards lined with the kind of equations Malik had only seen in textbooks. It didn't smell like any school he'd ever known. No disinfectant, no sweat, no cafeteria grease. It smelled like paper, printer ink, and coffee. The halls echoed when you walked too fast, like they were warning you to slow down. Speak softly. Respect the walls. This was the ivory tower, and Malik had been let in. Kind of. He stood outside Whitaker's office on a Tuesday afternoon, staring at the brass nameplate, Dr. Benjamin Whitaker, department chair. It felt like knocking on the door of history. Everyone on campus knew about Whitaker. He'd published papers before most people learned long division. Gave lectures in Europe. Collaborated with Nobel-adjacent mathematicians. And he was handsome in that academic way, silver hair, perfect posture, wire-rimmed glasses. They said Whitaker only took on 2 grad students a year, both of whom typically ended up at MIT or Cambridge. He was a gatekeeper. A kingmaker. And Malik was about to tell him he'd found a flaw in the king's theorem. Malik knocked. "Come in," came the deep voice from the other side. The office looked like something from a BBC documentary. Bookshelves that reached the ceiling, chalkboards full of clean proofs in white and green, 2 leather chairs that looked too expensive for a college campus. Whitaker didn't look up right away. He finished writing a line of notation on the chalkboard behind his desk, then set the chalk down with delicate precision. "Mr. Johnson," he said finally, turning. "You wanted to speak with me." Malik nodded. "Yes, sir. I had a question. About the assignment. Problem set number 4. Whitaker gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Go on." Malik pulled out his notes. His hand trembled slightly, but he masked it by smoothing the paper. "I was reviewing your proof in the text, the one tied to the vector convergence postulate. And I think, there might be a gap. In the base assumption. Specifically where you transition from f, x, to f, x plus h, using the limit definition." Whitaker blinked once. Slowly. "A gap," he repeated. Malik swallowed. "I just meant, it seemed like the transition assumes convergence under a condition that isn't explicitly justified. I tried to rewrite the segment. Here." He slid the page across the desk. Whitaker didn't look at the paper. Not at first. Instead, he studied Malik. Not unkindly, but carefully, like a doctor trying to figure out if a patient was exaggerating symptoms. "Do you know how many times that proof has been reviewed?" Whitaker asked. "I know it's been around since 2001, Malik said. "I read the original paper." "And you're, what, 18? 19? 19. Whitaker finally picked up the paper. He glanced over it briefly, then set it down. "Your instincts are bold," he said. "But boldness without discipline becomes recklessness. Have you taken graduate-level logic yet?" "No, sir." "Measure theory?" "Not yet." "Then I'd advise caution before suggesting holes in the work of people who've spent decades mastering this field." It wasn't angry. It wasn't even condescending. That made it worse. It was dismissal, neatly disguised as mentorship. Malik nodded, his jaw tightening. "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I just thought, maybe there's value in looking again. From a fresh angle." Whitaker leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "The desire to challenge is admirable," he said. "But the mark of maturity is knowing when to challenge, and how. You do well to study more before rewriting foundations. The university is not a proving ground for teenage theories. It is a place for learning what has already been proven." Malik stood. "Thank you for your time, sir." He left the office with his heart pounding in his chest. The next day in class, the tension was thick enough to touch. Whitaker didn't call on Malik. Didn't acknowledge him at all. Just dove into that day's lecture, moving briskly across the chalkboard as if the conversation had never happened. But Malik felt the weight of stares. Someone in the back row whispered something and laughed. He sat straighter. Took notes like nothing had happened. But inside, something was changing, not breaking, not yet, but bending under pressure. Later that week, he bumped into Jake outside the library, his roommate, the engineering major from Connecticut with the rich parents and the casual sarcasm of someone who'd never been told no. "Hey man," Jake said, grinning. "Heard you challenged Whitaker. Gutsy move." Malik didn't respond. Jake chuckled. "Just saying. Guy's a legend. My dad uses his model in hedge fund predictions. You sure you want to be that guy?" "What guy?" "The one who goes viral for being confidently wrong." Malik stuffed his hands into his hoodie pocket. "I'm not trying to go viral." Jake nodded. "Well, for what it's worth, Rachel thinks you're either a genius or nuts. She said it's cool you've got the nerve to speak up." "Rachel?" "Yeah, you know, stats major. Puerto Rican girl, always wears combat boots. She was in class Monday." Malik's heart ticked a little faster, but he shrugged. "Cool." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Anyway. Don't let it get in your head too much. First year's tough. Just play the game." That night, Malik sat on his bed, textbook open, trying to play the game. But the numbers wouldn't leave him alone. He stared again at the proof. Not the answer, the shape of the logic. There was a rhythm to it, like music. But near the start, the melody jumped a beat. He could feel it in his bones. It wasn't wrong. But it wasn't complete either. That was the difference. Not error, omission. His fingers twitched. He turned to a fresh page and started writing. Outside, the wind howled through the city. But inside his tiny room, Malik chased something deeper than approval. Truth. And somewhere, beneath the frustration, beneath the fear, beneath the isolation of being the only black kid in the room, something else sparked. Conviction. Malik's desk looked more like a war zone than a workspace. Pages were scattered across every surface, printer paper, graph sheets, yellow notepad scraps covered in equations, crossed-out terms, arrows, and red question marks. His textbook sat in the center like a commander, its binding cracked, corners frayed, and a section on vector convergence marked by 3 different sticky notes. It was 2:13 a.m. Malik hadn't eaten dinner. The only light in the room came from his desk lamp, flickering slightly, casting harsh shadows on the wall. Outside, Detroit slept, or tried to. Car alarms barked in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked back. But inside, Malik's mind was alive. Problem set number 7 wasn't due for another week. Most of his classmates hadn't even looked at it yet. But Malik had already solved it, twice. Then he solved it wrong on purpose, just to explore the boundaries of what was allowed. The last question was a beast: prove or disprove convergence within the bounds of Whitaker's theorem under inverse mapping conditions. The wording was classic Whitaker. Cold. Precise. Loaded with implication. But to Malik, it was also an invitation. Because the inverse mapping reference. That was exactly where his doubts began. Where the transition from f, x, to f, x plus h, leaned on a silent assumption, an assumption that only held if certain edge conditions were met. Conditions Whitaker never wrote down. He couldn't let it go. He didn't want to prove the professor wrong. He wanted to know if he was right. And what scared him most wasn't the risk of being embarrassed again, it was the creeping sense that he might be onto something real. At 3:02 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Yo, are you still awake?" Malik stared at the screen. They'd only spoken once since that class. She'd asked him a question about eigenvalues. They ended up talking for 20 minutes in the hallway. He hesitated, then replied. Yeah. Just working. I'm stuck on PS7. Mind if I ask you something? Sure. She FaceTimed him. Malik scrambled to clear the desk a little and smooth his hair, suddenly conscious of the bags under his eyes and the hoodie he'd been wearing for 2 days. Rachel appeared on screen in a dimly lit room, hair tied back, glasses on, hoodie zipped halfway. Hey, she said. You look awake. He laughed. That's generous. She raised an eyebrow. Are those 3 copies of the problem set behind you? 4. I got bored. She tilted her head. You got bored with Whittaker? No, he rubbed his eyes, I just keep thinking about question 7. The whole inverse mapping convergence angle. Rachel frowned thoughtfully. You mean the jump between domain limits and closure properties? He nodded. Yeah. But there's something else. In the original proof. I think the assumption he makes about bounded continuity skips a critical step. It holds under most conditions, but not all. Rachel blinked. You found a hole in the proof? I found a question, he said carefully. Not sure if it's a hole or a scratch. She was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward. I'll say this, most people would have dropped it after what happened in class. But you're still here. Still grinding. That's not dumb. Malik looked at her. They didn't call me dumb because I was wrong. They called me dumb because I didn't belong. Rachel nodded slowly. Well, screw that. You're clearly doing the math they won't touch. Keep going. Whatever this is, don't let them make you shrink. Something stirred in Malik's chest. Not pride, something better. Permission. Thanks, he said. Anytime. Oh, and hey, she added. If you write this up, like a real counterexample, make sure you get credit. Don't just hand it to them. That thought hadn't even crossed his mind. But now that it had, it stuck. By sunrise, Malik had a draft. He called it a convergence anomaly under bounded non-uniform closure. It wasn't a full disproof, just a carefully constructed counterexample showing that under certain mapping conditions, the theorem didn't hold. It wasn't flashy. It didn't blow anything up. But it mattered. He stared at the final line of the proof for a long time. It was elegant. Honest. Quietly powerful. And it might be the most dangerous thing he'd ever written. The next day in class, Malik sat in the middle row. Not hiding. Not front and center. Just, present. Whittaker stepped into the room, briefcase in hand, suit crisp as always. Before we begin, he said, a few of you have already submitted drafts for problem set number 7. I appreciate the enthusiasm. His eyes flicked to Malik. Briefly. He didn't smile. But remember, elegance in mathematics comes not from reinventing the wheel, but from proving the wheel's necessity. Several students chuckled. Malik didn't. He pulled out his notebook and uncapped his pen. That night, he went back to his draft. Reviewed it 3 times. Then uploaded it, not to the class portal, but to AR14, the open-access preprint server used by mathematicians around the world. He didn't post it under Malik Johnson. He used his full name, Malik Xavier Johnson. No bio. No photo. Just an abstract and a PDF. The moment he hit submit, he felt like he'd jumped off a cliff. But the silence that followed didn't scare him. It felt like freedom. The email came at 2:47 a.m. Malik didn't see it until morning. He was halfway through his soggy cereal, scrolling past campus event spam and 2 alerts from the registrar, when the subject line caught his eye. Your preprint submission, anomaly in vector convergence, MJX 2025-04. It was from a university address. Not bright futures. Cambridge. His heart stalled. He tapped the message open with one shaking thumb. Dear Mr. Johnson. My name is Dr. Aisha Iqbal, Research Fellow in Applied Mathematics at the University of Cambridge. I came across your preprint last night on AR14. It was flagged to me by a colleague who noticed its relevance to a current discussion in our seminar group. Your counterexample regarding the Whittaker postulate is well-structured and thoughtfully posed. While preliminary, it raises important questions, especially in light of some work we've been doing in stochastic vector modeling. Would you be open to a brief Zoom conversation to discuss your work further? Kind regards. Dr. Aisha Iqbal. Cambridge Department of Mathematical Sciences. Malik didn't move. The spoon in his bowl sagged under the weight of forgotten breakfast, sinking into lukewarm milk. The edges of his vision felt fuzzy. Like he was watching someone else read the message. Cambridge. Not a scam. Not spam. A real professor. Reaching out to him. He stared for a full minute before whispering. What the hell? He didn't reply right away. He wanted to, but his brain screamed for caution. What if it was a trap? What if Whittaker had friends overseas who were watching? He laughed at himself. Paranoid much? Still, something felt delicate. Like he'd cracked open a door no one wanted opened. He grabbed his phone and texted Rachel. Can I call? She responded immediately. Yup. What's up? 10 minutes later, he was pacing his bedroom, talking fast while Rachel listened with her usual calm curiosity. Cambridge, she said, eyebrows raised on the screen. That's big, Malik. I know, he said. But I don't know what they want. Or if I should even. Rachel cut him off. Bro. They read your math and they want to talk about it. That's a good thing. He rubbed his eyes. But what if Whittaker finds out? What if? Then let him. You didn't publish a diss track, Malik. You wrote a valid, well-reasoned mathematical critique. That's what scholars do. He doesn't own truth. That quieted him. Rachel added, this might be your chance to get outside the bubble. You've been trapped in his classroom. Now you've got eyes on you from real thinkers. Not just legacy professors protecting their turf. Malik exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. He wrote back to Dr. Iqbal, thanking her and accepting the meeting. They scheduled it for Friday. All week, Malik was on edge. He reread his draft 10 times, checking for errors. He updated a few footnotes, clarified his notation. On Wednesday, he bought a second-hand button-up shirt from a thrift store. Thursday night, he polished his laptop screen with a glasses wipe. Friday came too fast. He clicked into the Zoom link at exactly 9 a.m. The loading wheel spun, then the window popped open. Dr. Aisha Iqbal appeared on screen, hijab, sharp features, dark eyes framed by thick glasses. Behind her, bookshelves lined the wall, dotted with mugs and neatly stacked papers. Good morning, Malik, she said warmly. British accent. Calm presence. Can you hear me all right? Yes, ma'am. Loud and clear. She smiled. Thank you for agreeing to speak. I'll get right to it, your paper's interesting. Unpolished in spots, sure, but the core insight, especially the way you construct the bounded counterexample, is fresh. Elegant, even. Malik blinked. Thank you. I was surprised you're an undergrad. First year, I heard. He nodded. You've stirred the pot, Mr. Johnson. Some of our peers are quite fond of Dr. Whittaker's theorem. But there are others, myself included, who've had quiet concerns for years. No one wanted to challenge it publicly. Too much clout tied to it. Malik leaned forward. You think I'm right? I think, she said, you asked the right question. And that's how revolutions begin in mathematics. His stomach fluttered. She continued, if you're interested, I'd like to invite you to collaborate on a formal paper. Peer-reviewed. We'd co-author, of course, and submit it for proper critique. You'd have full credit for the anomaly. He could barely breathe. Me, he whispered. You. You're the ghost in the machine. The fresh set of eyes. That's where the best insights come from. After they ended the call, Malik just sat there for a while, staring at his reflection in the black Zoom window. Cambridge. A paper. His name. On something real. He thought of his grandma, cleaning motel rooms with cracked knuckles. His mother counting her tips from the night shift. Ms. Carson, handing him that logic book with red ink in the margins. Rachel's voice, steady in his ears. Then, a knock. A hard one. Front door. Sharp. Repeated. He stood slowly. Another knock. When he opened the door, his roommate Jake stood there, holding a white envelope. This just came. Guy said to hand it to you in person. Malik took it. No return address. He opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of high-quality paper. Mr. Johnson. It has come to our attention that you've submitted independent work to a public academic repository that engages critically with internal course content. While intellectual freedom is respected, there are protocols to follow. We request that you attend a formal meeting with the Academic Standards Committee next Tuesday at 10 a.m., room 417, Math Department. Failure to attend may result in disciplinary action. Regards. Office of Academic Integrity. Malik's hands trembled. They knew. They were watching. He sat down slowly, envelope in his lap. But even as the fear crept in, another feeling overrode it. Determination. Tuesday morning came wrapped in a chill that clung to Malik's bones. He wore the same second-hand button-up from the Zoom call, freshly ironed and tucked into his cleanest jeans. No hoodie. No sneakers. He looked in the mirror and saw someone he barely recognized, nervous, sharp-eyed, standing on the edge of something. As he stepped out of the house, he could still feel the envelope in his pocket, like a stone. The summons from the Office of Academic Integrity had no warmth, no humanity. Just rules and consequences. The walk to campus felt longer than usual. 15 blocks. Each one carrying the weight of everything he had risked. Room 417 was at the far end of the mathematics building, not the grand lecture halls but the old wing, where the ceilings were low and the paint peeled near the corners. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew. He arrived 5 minutes early. The door was closed. A thin woman with short gray hair and glasses stepped out a moment later. She looked like she hadn't smiled in years. Mr. Johnson? Yes. Come in, please. The room was small, plain. One long table. 4 chairs on one side. One on the other. Of course. A formality dressed like fairness. He sat, stiff-backed, hands folded. Across from him sat Dr. Wendell, the Dean of Students. Professor Simon, from the Ethics and Philosophy Department. Dr. Young, Assistant Chair of Mathematics. And Whitaker. Of course. Thank you for coming, Dean Wendell began. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. This meeting is to discuss concerns raised regarding academic protocol. Malik nodded slowly. Am I being accused of plagiarism? No, Professor Simon answered, but the issue is more nuanced. Your AR-14 submission contains material derivative of Professor Whitaker's lectures, which some may consider intellectual property of the institution. Malik blinked. So I'm not allowed to ask questions about course material? It's not the question, Mr. Johnson, Whitaker said coolly, but the implication. By publishing a critique without internal peer review, you risk misrepresenting both the content and the institution. Malik's voice steadied. I included full citations. I never claimed it was a finalized disproof. It's labeled as a counterexample. You also used your university affiliation in the abstract, added Dr. Young. That implies institutional support, which was never granted. Malik leaned forward. I didn't claim university endorsement. I stated my current academic position, because it's true. The room shifted. He could feel it, the delicate balance between intimidation and legality. They didn't have much to stand on, but they had tone, presence, legacy. What did he have? Truth. Dean Wendell folded his hands. We want to be clear, no one is suggesting you acted maliciously. But we must preserve academic order. Normally, students bring concerns directly to their professor. I did, Malik said. Whitaker's jaw tightened. I brought it to you. I asked a question. You dismissed it. I tried to reframe it. You ignored me. So I worked alone. That's what we're taught, right? Think independently. Challenge assumptions. Silence. Professor Simon adjusted his glasses. The question, Mr. Johnson, is not whether inquiry is valuable. It's whether the manner of inquiry was appropriate. You've stirred a pot that, frankly, most of us were happy leaving alone. Why? Malik asked. Because it's inconvenient. More silence. Then Whitaker leaned forward. His voice was cold steel. You have potential. But you're reckless. Do you think this is how real progress is made? By tossing drafts online and hoping someone bites? No, Malik said. Real progress is made by people who aren't afraid to be wrong. People who aren't protected by titles or tenure. People like me. Professor Simon raised a hand. Let's not escalate. Mr. Johnson, if we ask you to take the paper down, would you comply? Malik paused. That was the line. The cost of staying here, of playing the game. He thought of Ms. Carson. Of Rachel. Of Dr. Iqbal's voice through the Zoom screen. He thought of the version of himself from a year ago, sitting in a public library with a second-hand algebra book. And then he looked Whitaker in the eyes. No, he said. I won't take it down. The dean sighed. You understand that may carry consequences. I do. He stood. I'll take those consequences. But I won't be silent. Not when I know what I saw. The door clicked shut behind him. Malik walked back through the hall, out into the cold. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt clear. Like something in him had shifted. A decision made, no going back. He didn't know if they'd put a mark on his record. Or suspend him. Or worse. But he did know one thing. He'd chosen himself. That evening, he got a text from Rachel. Heard what happened. Words getting around. He replied. I'm not backing down. Good. Because you're not alone anymore. The first time Malik noticed it, he thought it was just a coincidence. He was walking across the quad, gray hoodie pulled up, earbuds in, backpack slung low, when someone he didn't know nodded at him. A quiet, subtle nod. Not the kind strangers usually offer. Then, a day later, it happened again. A girl in a Stats hoodie, someone he'd never spoken to, held the elevator for him longer than necessary. You're Malik, right? She asked softly. Yeah. I read your paper. She smiled. Ballsy. Respect. And just like that, she got off on the third floor and disappeared. By the end of the week, it was clear. Something was happening. Word had spread, not just about the paper, but about the committee meeting, and how Malik had refused to back down. The details warped slightly with every retelling. Some versions had him yelling at Whitaker. Others said he'd walked out mid-sentence. A few claimed his math had been so good it got banned. Malik didn't correct any of them. He didn't have time. Because now, people were reaching out. Emails. DMs, messages slid under his dorm door. Saw your counterexample, been wondering about that postulate for years. I tried modifying your anomaly into a nonlinear mapping. Could use your eyes on it. You're the reason I didn't switch majors this week. Just wanted you to know. There was a name they started using for it. A nickname born of online forums and campus whispers. The Underground Network. It wasn't organized. Not at first. Just a scattershot of students, grad researchers, and even a couple of adjuncts from other departments. People who had always felt a little out of place. People who questioned things quietly in the backs of lecture halls. Now they had something, someone, to rally around. One Thursday night, Malik met with a few of them in a back corner of the science library. 7 students. 3 laptops. 1 whiteboard. It wasn't some revolution planning session. They were just solving problems. Exploring extensions of Malik's anomaly. Connecting it to applied physics, machine learning models, even game theory. I never thought math could feel like this, one sophomore said, her eyes bright. Like a weapon. It's not a weapon, Malik replied. It's a key. Back in his room that night, Malik stared at the string of messages lighting up his screen. Rachel was in half of them, now clearly acting as his unofficial gatekeeper. She'd set up a shared Google Drive. Then a Slack workspace. Your inbox is a disaster, she told him. People need structure. You've got a movement now, whether you like it or not. A movement, he laughed. Rachel stared at him through the screen. You're doing what they were afraid of, decentralizing authority. Whitaker's theorem wasn't just math. It was legacy. Reputation. This is democratizing truth. Malik exhaled. That's a lot of weight. Then don't carry it alone. Friday morning, Malik received another email. Not from Cambridge this time. Subject, Symposium Invitation, Princeton Mathematics Forum 2025. He opened it with shaking fingers. Dear Mr. Johnson. We would like to formally invite you to present your work on vector convergence anomalies at our upcoming annual Student Research Symposium. Your submission was brought to our attention by Dr. Iqbal and reviewed by our committee. We believe your insights represent the kind of critical thinking we strive to promote. Travel and lodging will be covered. Please confirm your attendance by April 15th. Sincerely. Office of Undergraduate Research, Princeton University. Malik leaned back in his chair and let out a slow, stunned breath. Rachel screamed when he told her. You're going to Princeton, she shouted over FaceTime. I swear to God, if you don't go, I'm buying your ticket myself. Malik grinned, barely believing it himself. I don't even own a suit, he mumbled. You've got a mind that breaks legacy theorems, she said. We'll figure out the wardrobe later. But even in that flood of support, the shadow lingered. He knew Whitaker wouldn't stay silent. That kind of academic pride didn't go quietly. Sure enough, 2 days later, a new post appeared on the Bright Futures Math Department webpage. Faculty lecture announcement. Dr. Benjamin Whitaker will deliver a special lecture titled, Convergence, Consistency, and Controversy, Revisiting the Foundations of Mathematical Assumption. The caption was careful. But the timing? The title? It was a response. A public rebuttal, masked as academic curiosity. The battlefield was shifting. And Malik was no longer an unknown name. Rachel forwarded him the link with one note. He's coming for you. Don't flinch. Malik stared at the webpage. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. Because something inside him had finally clicked. He wasn't just defending a paper. He was defending his place in the room. And he was never giving it back. The lecture hall was packed. It was a rare Friday afternoon when the entire Department of Mathematical Sciences at Bright Futures University came together, but here they were, nearly 300 students, professors, and staff filling every seat, every aisle, every inch of the room. There were whispers, nervous energy in the air. Some were curious, others were eager to see Whittaker defend his honor after the anomalous paper that Malik had published. Malik sat in the back, his hoodie pulled low, trying to blend in. But that wasn't possible anymore. Everyone knew who he was now, even if they didn't recognize his face. His paper had made sure of that. The whispers that had followed him all week had only grown louder, sharper. Dr. Whittaker entered the room with his usual air of self-assured authority. His black suit, meticulously pressed, glistened under the fluorescent lights, and his glasses caught the light as he adjusted them with a brief, deliberate gesture. He didn't look at Malik as he walked past, but Malik could feel the weight of the older professor's gaze, the silent accusation hanging in the air. The projector clicked on, and Whittaker stood at the front of the room, his voice booming as he began his lecture. Mathematics, Whittaker began, is an art of purity. It demands that we seek simplicity in the face of complexity. And yet, as with all great works, there are moments when the clarity we seek is clouded, by doubt, by noise, and by those who misunderstand the elegance of well-established theorems. Malik's heartbeat sped up, his palms sweaty. He could already tell where this was going. Today, Whittaker continued, I will revisit one of the foundational concepts of our field. Anomalies, they say, are signs of error. But I say they are the sign of a deeper misunderstanding. We'll take a closer look at the counterexample that has recently been making waves. Malik's stomach tightened. He could feel the eyes on him now. People knew. The paper was out. Whittaker was about to take his work apart. Let us begin with the notion of convergence, one of the most sacred principles in mathematics. We assume it's universally valid, a fundamental truth. But when we dissect the argument presented by this student, we see only a shaky argument, a misstep that could lead to a dangerous reinterpretation of established norms. He paused, as if letting the weight of his words settle into the room. Malik's throat felt dry. The room was still. The only sounds were Whittaker's voice and the scribbling of pens on paper. But Malik didn't care about that. He cared about one thing. Whittaker had just called his work dangerous. The last time he'd heard those words was when he was a child, after he'd tried to build a rocket out of spare parts in his grandma's backyard. Dangerous. That was what the world told him, every time he tried to think outside the box. Well, this was his rocket. And he was going to make it fly. The lecture continued, but Malik wasn't listening anymore. He couldn't. His mind raced. He felt the tension building inside him, a slow burn starting to spread. Whittaker was doing more than just defending his theorem. He was attacking Malik's credibility, belittling his effort with every word, undermining the entire idea that a student could ever challenge something that had been regarded as final. Malik had thought he could handle this. He thought he'd prepared for the worst. But this? This was more than just a personal attack. Whittaker was aiming to destroy the very foundation of everything Malik had worked for. He was trying to suffocate the idea of challenging the status quo. And he wasn't going to let that happen. He stood up. It was impulsive, maybe reckless, but Malik didn't care. He had made up his mind. This wasn't just about his paper anymore. This was about something much bigger. It was about the future of students like him, students who were told time and time again that their voices didn't matter. I respectfully disagree, Professor, Malik's voice cut through the lecture hall, sharp and clear. The room fell silent. Everyone turned toward him. Whittaker stopped mid-sentence, blinking, clearly thrown off by the interruption. Malik stepped into the aisle, his gaze never wavering from Whitaker's. Convergence is not the problem, Malik continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. The problem is the assumption that all paths converge in the same way. Your theorem doesn't account for the possibility that some systems may be far more complex than you give them credit for. That's where the flaw is. It's not a misstep, as you say. It's a fundamental limitation in the framework itself. Whitaker's lips pressed into a thin line. He cleared his throat. "This is not the time, Mr. Johnson," he said, voice icy. "You should have presented your findings in a more appropriate setting. If you believe you've discovered an error, you could have come to me, as any respectful student would." "You dismissed me, Professor," Malik shot back, his anger building. "You told me I wasn't qualified to even ask the question. But now, you're trying to silence me. And I won't be silenced. Not by you, not by anyone." The room was still. Dead still. A buzz of disbelief hovered in the air. For a moment, there was only the sound of Malik's heartbeat in his ears. And then, Dr. Iqbal's voice. She stood at the back of the room, her figure small but unmistakable, her hand raised in the air, her eyes locked on Malik. "I'm sorry, Professor Whitaker," Dr. Iqbal said, her voice calm but firm. "But Malik's point is valid. His work, while incomplete, sheds light on an area that has been overlooked for far too long. And, I believe, the academic community needs to take it seriously." The room shifted. The murmurs began. Some agreed with Malik. Others with Whitaker. But the seed had been planted. Dr. Iqbal was here. She was with him. And that meant more than anything. Whitaker glared at Malik, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "This is not the time, Mr. Johnson. You will meet with me, alone, in my office after this lecture. We will discuss this further. In private." But Malik didn't back down. He didn't need to. "I'll meet you in your office, Professor," Malik said, voice unwavering. "But this conversation isn't over. Not until the world sees it." The room stood still for a moment longer, then slowly, hesitantly, a few people began to clap. It wasn't much. But it was enough. As Malik made his way out of the lecture hall, a heavy weight lifted off his chest. The air felt different now. He wasn't alone in this fight. And maybe, just maybe, Whitaker's time at the top was coming to an end. Malik's steps echoed in the empty hallway as he walked toward Dr. Whitaker's office. He had never been here before, and if he was being honest, he didn't want to be. The walls, lined with accolades and framed degrees, seemed to mock him as he passed. Each one a symbol of the establishment he was now challenging. His chest tightened with every step, but his resolve didn't falter. This was where it had all led, this was the moment. He reached the door, a brass plaque reading, "Dr. Benjamin Whitaker, Professor of Mathematics," hanging like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Malik knocked once, then opened the door. "Come in, Mr. Johnson," Whitaker's voice called from inside. Malik stepped in, his shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. Whitaker was behind his desk, his fingers drumming lightly on the surface as he watched Malik approach. His usual air of confident detachment was gone, replaced by something darker, something more dangerous. "Sit down," Whitaker said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "We need to talk about what happened in that lecture." Malik stood still for a moment, the tension in the room almost palpable. Then, without a word, he sat. "You've made a real spectacle of yourself, Mr. Johnson," Whitaker began, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of irritation. "Disrupting my lecture. Disrespecting my work. Do you realize what you've done?" "I didn't come here to apologize, Professor," Malik said, his voice steady. "I came to talk about the math." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "You think this is just about math? This is about respect. About tradition. You think you can waltz in here, challenge years of established theory, and expect people to take you seriously? I didn't challenge the theory, I showed that it had a flaw. A flaw that you've been too blind to see. You're not respecting the math, you're respecting a reputation. Malik leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining strength. I'm not here to tear down your career. I'm here to ask you to look at the problem with fresh eyes. Because if you don't, we're all going to be stuck in the same place forever. Whitaker let out a sharp laugh, a laugh that lacked humor. And you, a student, think you can make me see the truth? How naive. You've got a lot of guts, Johnson, I'll give you that. But don't mistake arrogance for brilliance. Malik's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. I'm not arrogant, Professor. I'm just asking you to listen. I have a solution. And I've got people backing me. You're not going to be able to shut this down just because you say it's wrong. Whitaker's face darkened. You think people are backing you? Don't fool yourself. You're nothing more than a sideshow. A curiosity. I've had students like you before, overzealous, eager to make a name for themselves. You'll be forgotten as quickly as you came. Malik felt a chill run through him, but he refused to let it show. I don't care about being famous. I care about the truth. And if you're so sure I'm wrong, why haven't you published your own response to the paper? Why are you letting me do this alone? The room grew quieter as Whitaker's silence stretched. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and measured. You're asking the wrong questions, Johnson, he said. You're thinking in terms of right and wrong, black and white. But this is bigger than that. It's about control. Power. And it's about knowing your place in the world. You think you can just waltz into academia and rewrite history? You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not rewriting history, Malik said, his tone cold now. I'm rewriting a mistake. And I won't stop until I'm heard. Whitaker's eyes flicked toward the door, as if debating whether to have the conversation with a little more privacy, or perhaps whether to have Malik removed. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the desk again, this time with an almost meditative rhythm. You'll regret this, Mr. Johnson, Whitaker finally said, his voice laced with a venomous calm. Do you know what happens to people who challenge giants like me? They become targets. They become nothing. Malik stood up, not bothering to sit any longer. His chest was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. He'd had enough of this. Enough of Whitaker's arrogance, his threats, his attempts to crush anyone who dared to challenge his authority. I'd rather be a target for telling the truth than a nobody for sitting back and letting people like you run the show, Malik said, his voice rising. You might have your reputation, your papers, your followers. But you don't have the truth. And in the end, that's all that matters. For a moment, there was silence. Whitaker stared at him, his expression unreadable. Malik stood tall, refusing to flinch. Finally, Whitaker stood too. You think you're the first person to defy me? His voice was a low growl now. I've buried careers before. And I'll bury yours if I have to. Malik didn't flinch. I'll take my chances, he said, his voice steady, unyielding. But know this, Professor, this isn't over. I'm not backing down. And the world will know the truth, whether you like it or not. With that, he turned on his heel and walked toward the door. Whitaker didn't stop him. As Malik stepped out of the office and into the hallway, he took a deep breath. His heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through him. He had just stood up to one of the most powerful men in the department, and he hadn't backed down. But as he walked away, the weight of what he had just done settled over him. Whitaker had threatened him. He had tried to intimidate him. But Malik knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath him had shifted. The confrontation with Whitaker had been both a victory and a warning. It was the kind of moment that people would remember. The kind that would echo through the halls of Bright Futures University long after he'd left. But as Malik walked away from the professor's office, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. For a moment, he thought he might feel the adrenaline of victory, the rush of having stood up to the very man who had belittled him for so long. But all he felt was an uneasy stillness, the kind that settles in when you realize you've just opened a door with consequences that you're not sure you can handle. By the time he got back to his dorm room, the whispers had already started. It was inevitable. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire. The rumor mill at Bright Futures University was ruthless, and now, Malik was at the center of it. He sat on his bed, his laptop open in front of him, scrolling through a cascade of messages that had flooded his inbox. Some were from his classmates, others from students he barely knew. Everyone had an opinion. Some messages were supportive, but others, not so much. "Man, you really went after Whitaker today. He's gonna ruin you. You should have backed down. You're going to regret this. Don't let the old guard push you down. Keep going, Malik." Malik's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he read the different messages. The support was heartening, but the warnings were louder. The whispers were becoming a storm. Whitaker was a titan in the department, a pillar of academia. And Malik? He was just a kid from a background that most of these students could never imagine. The door to his room creaked open, and Malik looked up to see his roommate, Jamal, standing there. Jamal's expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture that Malik recognized immediately. "You okay, bro?" Jamal asked, his voice quiet. Malik let out a breath, glancing at his phone again. "I don't know. I thought standing up to him would feel different. But it's like, everyone's watching. Waiting for me to mess up." Jamal walked over and sat down beside him. "You knew this wasn't gonna be easy. Whitaker's not just a professor, he's got power. People are scared of him. They'll come after you in ways you can't predict. I just thought if I stood up, it'd make a difference," Malik said, frustration creeping into his voice. "But now I feel like I've got a target on my back." "You do," Jamal said flatly. "And I'm not gonna lie to you, man, it's only gonna get worse from here. People like Whitaker don't forget these things. He'll make sure you regret it." Malik sank back against his bed, staring up at the ceiling. "I can't go back now. I can't just let him bully me into silence." Jamal sighed. "I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying, you gotta be prepared. This isn't some little debate. You're challenging the whole damn system. And those who sit at the top, they don't like being challenged." Malik knew Jamal was right, but he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to admit that he was playing with fire, that the odds were stacked against him in ways he couldn't even fully comprehend. That night, as Malik lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he tried to prepare himself for what would come next. He had no idea if he was going to lose everything. No idea if Whitaker would pull strings to have him expelled or discredited. But one thing he did know was that he couldn't back down. Not now. The next day, the backlash was immediate and intense. As Malik walked across campus, he could feel the weight of every stare. Some students avoided eye contact entirely, their expressions stiff and uncomfortable. Others whispered behind their hands as they passed. He heard phrases like, "career suicide," and, "what was he thinking," mixed in with his own name. By noon, his inbox was flooded again. This time, the messages weren't from his classmates. They were from professors, administrators, and even a few of the faculty advisors. "Malik, we need to talk. Meet me in my office as soon as possible. Malik, what you did yesterday was reckless. You've upset the balance of things. Your actions were disruptive to the academic environment. I suggest you reconsider how you handle this moving forward." Each message was more disheartening than the last, each one making it clear that the fallout was beginning. Even Dr. Iqbal, who had stood by him in the lecture hall, was eerily silent. She hadn't reached out. Not yet. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was being cornered. That afternoon, a message came through that made his blood run cold. It was from Dr. Whitaker. "You've made a grave mistake, Malik. I trust you'll come to understand that soon. You have no idea what you're up against. You'll be hearing from the administration shortly." Malik felt his heart drop into his stomach. Whitaker's message wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. The administration was going to get involved. The battle was no longer just between him and the professor. It was a full-scale war now. Later that day, he found himself sitting in the cold, sterile office of the department chair, Dr. Helen Walters. Dr. Walters was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding professionalism. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Malik," Dr. Walters said, her voice flat, "we've received complaints about your conduct during Professor Whitaker's lecture. You disrupted an important academic discussion and violated university protocol. This cannot go unnoticed." "I didn't violate anything," Malik said, his voice tight. "I presented my work. I asked questions. What's the problem with that?" "The problem is the way you went about it," Dr. Walters replied, her tone unwavering. "Publicly challenging a tenured professor in front of an entire class. That's not how things work here. That's not how academic discourse happens. We follow proper channels, and you ignored that." "I didn't ignore anything. I was trying to fix a mistake. An actual flaw in a theorem that's been treated as infallible for years." "Your belief is not the issue here," Dr. Walters said. "It's your method. You're a student, Malik. You have to earn the right to challenge professors like Professor Whitaker. And if you can't prove that your theory holds up, if you can't show that it's sound, then this could seriously damage your reputation." Malik's hands balled into fists at his sides. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. It wasn't about the math anymore, it was about silencing him. "You're not listening," he said, his voice low but intense. "I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to show you that we're wrong about something fundamental. But instead of listening, you're all just trying to shut me down." Dr. Walters' eyes narrowed. "This is your final warning, Malik. You need to be careful. You may have supporters now, but if you keep going down this path, you'll find yourself isolated. And trust me, you won't be able to fight the entire department." Malik walked out of Dr. Walters' office, a heavy weight in his chest. He had no idea how long he could keep this up. The walls were closing in on him, and every step felt like it took him further away from his goal. But he couldn't stop now. Not when he knew the truth. The fight had just begun. Malik didn't know how much longer he could keep this up. The pressure was mounting, and with every passing day, the whispers around campus grew louder. His inbox was flooded with messages from students and faculty alike, some supportive, some threatening. He had known the stakes would be high, but he hadn't anticipated just how deep the roots of the university's hierarchy went, or how far Dr. Whitaker's influence reached. Malik couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, Whitaker's smug face in that lecture hall, dismissing his work without a second thought. But now, it wasn't just Whitaker's anger Malik was up against. It was the weight of an entire academic system that thrived on the status quo, that resisted change with all its might. And yet, Malik wasn't about to back down. His theory, his proof, was too important to let it be buried under layers of ego and bureaucracy. But now, he needed something more. Something that could tip the balance in his favor. He sat at his desk in his dorm room, staring at the computer screen. He had spent hours refining his proof, ensuring every equation was flawless, every variable accounted for. The math was solid, but something else was missing, something that could validate his work beyond the walls of the university. He needed allies, and not just in the classroom. He needed the world to see what he had found. And so, he did what he had avoided doing up until that point. He reached out to the academic community beyond bright futures. Malik started sending emails to mathematicians, professors, and researchers whose work he admired. He had no idea if anyone would respond. They were busy people, after all. But he was desperate. His letter was simple, outlining his findings and inviting them to review his proof. He included his detailed work, along with a brief explanation of the flaws he had found in Dr. Whittaker's famous theorem. The responses came faster than he expected. A professor from the University of Chicago, Dr. Evelyn Hayes, was the first to reply. She had been an outspoken critic of established mathematical theories in the past, and her email was both encouraging and cautious. "I'm intrigued by your work, Malik," Dr. Hayes wrote. "I've gone over the theory you've outlined, and I believe there's something here worth exploring. Let's talk. I'll set up a time for us to discuss in more detail." Malik's heart raced as he read her email. This was it. This was the opportunity he needed. With Dr. Hayes' support, maybe, just maybe, he could force the university to take him seriously. But at the same time, Malik couldn't help but wonder what kind of consequences would follow. He had already felt the brunt of Whittaker's wrath. Would an academic heavyweight like Dr. Hayes protect him? Or would he find himself caught between two worlds? He quickly replied, setting up a time for a virtual meeting. In the meantime, he kept working, refining his proofs, strengthening his arguments, ensuring that there was no way for anyone to dismiss his work as a mistake or a fluke. When the day of the meeting arrived, Malik sat in front of his laptop, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of everything hanging on this moment. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the computer's fan. He adjusted his shirt, checked his notes, and then clicked the link to join the video call. Dr. Hayes appeared on the screen, her sharp eyes quickly scanning Malik's face. She was older than he had imagined, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun. Her demeanor was professional but warm, a stark contrast to the coldness he had encountered at the university. "Malik," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I've had a chance to review your work. I must say, I'm impressed. This is not something I expected to see from a student." Malik let out a breath, feeling the weight on his shoulders ease ever so slightly. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes. I needed someone to take it seriously. I've been trying to get the faculty at my university to look at it, but—" "I know the feeling," Dr. Hayes interrupted, her lips curling into a slight smile. "I've had my own run-ins with the academic establishment. They don't like it when the rules get rewritten. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means they're uncomfortable." Malik nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "That's what I'm up against. Professor Whittaker is a legend at my university. And now that I've challenged his work, the administration is coming down hard on me." "I understand," Dr. Hayes said thoughtfully. "But that's the price of doing groundbreaking work, Malik. There are always going to be people who want to hold on to their positions, their power, and their reputation. But you're not wrong. The math is solid. I can see that. If this holds up, you'll have changed the field of mathematics forever." Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the validation he had been seeking. But with it came the realization that his battle was far from over. "I need to get this published," Malik said, his voice steady with determination. "But I can't do it alone. I need your help, Dr. Hayes. I need someone who can back me up. Someone who can help me navigate the politics of this." Dr. Hayes smiled, and Malik could see the spark of something in her eyes. "You've got me, Malik. I'll help you. But we need to move carefully. There's a lot at stake here, and we'll need to bring in other voices, other experts who can corroborate your findings. If we're going to do this, we have to make sure the world knows this isn't just a student throwing out a theory. This is a legitimate breakthrough." Malik felt a wave of relief wash over him. This was the lifeline he had been hoping for. With Dr. Hayes in his corner, he could finally push forward. But he also understood the gravity of what he was about to do. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, and the deeper he got into this fight, the more dangerous it would become. Whitaker wouldn't go down easily. The university would fight tooth and nail to protect its reputation. But Malik wasn't afraid anymore. He had come too far to turn back. "Thank you, Dr. Hayes," Malik said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I won't let you down." "You won't," she replied with a confident nod. "But remember, Malik, this is just the beginning. The road ahead will be long, but if we play our cards right, we'll make sure the truth comes out." As the call ended and the screen went dark, Malik sat back in his chair. He had made his choice. He had made his move. The tide was rising, and there was no turning back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following days were a blur for Malik. The weight of everything he had just set in motion felt like an avalanche, one that was only beginning to roll down the mountainside. After his meeting with Dr. Hayes, he could feel a strange, exhilarating sense of hope rising in his chest. For the first time since the confrontation with Professor Whitaker, he felt like he was no longer fighting alone. But the road ahead was still unclear, and the stakes were higher than ever. Dr. Hayes was quick to set things in motion. She connected Malik with several prominent mathematicians from around the world who specialized in areas related to Whitaker's theorem. These weren't just academics, they were people who had the credentials and the credibility to challenge the establishment. Some were professors at prestigious universities, others had published groundbreaking papers that had reshaped their fields. One was even a Fields Medal winner, the highest honor a mathematician could achieve. Each of them was curious about Malik's work, and each of them brought a different perspective. They pored over the details of his proof, scrutinizing every equation, every assumption. Malik spent countless hours in online meetings, explaining his work to these experts, getting feedback, revising sections that needed more clarity, and strengthening parts that were still vulnerable. As the days passed, Malik's theory began to take shape in ways that even he hadn't anticipated. The deeper he dove into it, the more he realized how far-reaching his discovery could be. Whitaker's theorem wasn't just flawed, it was built on a shaky foundation that had long been ignored, masked by the sheer weight of the professor's reputation. Yet the deeper Malik and his team dug, the more obstacles they encountered. The political dynamics in the world of academia were far more complicated than Malik had imagined. Support from other mathematicians came in fits and starts, and some of them were hesitant to fully commit. The risks were enormous, and many feared the backlash they'd face if they publicly sided with Malik. One of the mathematicians, Dr. Elena Sanchez, was particularly vocal about her concerns. She was a tenured professor at a prestigious university in Europe, known for her groundbreaking work in abstract algebra. "I'm willing to listen, Malik," Dr. Sanchez said during one of their late-night video calls, "but you have to understand what we're up against. Whitaker is a titan in the field. And this is not just about proving him wrong, it's about taking on a whole academic system that has benefited from his ideas for decades. We're not just talking about math, we're talking about reputations, careers, and funding. If we go after Whitaker publicly, we're going after a lot of very powerful people." "I know that," Malik replied, trying to suppress the frustration that bubbled beneath the surface. "But the math is wrong. That's all I care about. I'm not doing this to destroy anyone's career. I'm doing this because it's the truth. And if we don't do something, we're all complicit in keeping a lie alive." Dr. Sanchez paused for a moment, her brow furrowed. "You have the right mindset. But I hope you're ready for the consequences. If we do this, we do it together. And we do it carefully. One wrong move, and we'll all be blacklisted." Malik nodded. "I understand. But I'm not backing down." Dr. Sanchez gave a small smile, though it was tinged with caution. "Neither am I. Let's see where this goes. Over the next few weeks, they began to assemble a team of supporters. Dr. Hayes continued to play a central role, using her connections to arrange private meetings with other influential mathematicians. These were people who had their own reservations but were willing to consider the possibility that Whittaker's theorem might not be as infallible as the academic community had long believed. Despite the mounting pressure, Malik's confidence grew. His proof was becoming more airtight with every revision, and the support he was gathering made it clear that this wasn't just a fight for one person's academic standing, it was a challenge to the very foundations of an entire field of mathematics. But with that confidence came the realization that Malik wasn't just challenging Professor Whittaker anymore. He was challenging the entire academic establishment. The people who had upheld Whittaker's legacy, who had built their careers on his work, weren't going to let it go easily. One evening, as Malik sat at his desk, revising the final draft of his proof for what felt like the 100th time, a new email popped up in his inbox. It was from Dr. Whittaker. Malik. I've been made aware of your little campaign against my work. While I've chosen to remain calm up until now, your actions are becoming increasingly reckless. You're in way over your head. I suggest you stop before you make a fool of yourself. Consider this your final warning. If you continue down this path, there will be consequences. The administration is already aware of your behavior, and I have no doubt they will take appropriate action. I've spent my career building my reputation, and I won't let someone like you tarnish it. I strongly advise you to stop while you still can. Professor Whittaker. Malik stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His first instinct was to respond immediately, to lash out at the arrogance of the man who had made his life a living hell. But instead, Malik took a deep breath. He wasn't going to give Whittaker the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. The professor's message was exactly what he had expected, a warning, a threat, an attempt to intimidate him into backing down. But it only strengthened Malik's resolve. If Whittaker thought he could scare him, he was sorely mistaken. Malik knew that the path ahead was going to be even more treacherous. The administration would undoubtedly get involved, and the backlash would be swift and brutal. But there was no going back now. Not after everything he had sacrificed, not after all the hours of work, the sleepless nights, and the sacrifices he had made. He was on the brink of something big, something that could change everything. And in that moment, Malik realized just how much had changed since the first time he had stepped into that lecture hall. He was no longer the quiet student in the back row. He was a force to be reckoned with. Dr. Hayes had been right. This was just the beginning. The days following Dr. Whittaker's email felt like a blur. Malik had been bracing himself for this moment, the inevitable retaliation, but nothing could have prepared him for how fast things escalated. The university, once a place of opportunity and promise, suddenly seemed like a looming, unforgiving giant, ready to crush everything in its path. It started with subtlety. Malik was called in for a meeting with his academic advisor, Dr. Lee, who had always been a kind and approachable figure. But today, his face was tight, his expression strained. Malik, Dr. Lee began, his voice unusually cold, you need to understand the gravity of the situation. Professor Whittaker is well respected here, and the administration is not happy about your actions. They're asking for an explanation. Malik's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had known this was coming, but hearing the words out loud felt like a punch to the gut. I've done nothing wrong, he said, his voice steady. I'm simply asking for the truth to be recognized. Whittaker's theorem is flawed, and I've proven it. Dr. Lee sighed, his fingers nervously tapping on the edge of the desk. You're treading in dangerous waters. You've made a very public challenge to a professor with decades of experience. You can't just accuse someone of error without facing consequences, Malik. You need to back down before this turns into something you can't control. I'm not backing down, Malik said, his voice firmer now. The math is clear. And I have the support of experts who back me up. Support? You're relying on people outside the university, Dr. Lee countered. That's not how this works. The academic world here is insular, Malik. If you keep going down this path, you'll destroy your future here. Malik felt a surge of frustration but kept his cool. He knew that Dr. Lee was trying to help, but it was clear that his advisor was more concerned with the university's reputation than with the truth. I'll make my case in my own way, Malik said. And I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right. Dr. Lee's eyes darkened. I hope you know what you're doing. This won't end well. The meeting ended with Malik walking out of Dr. Lee's office feeling more isolated than ever. The university had turned its back on him. But he wasn't about to give up. He had a point to prove, and he was more determined than ever to see it through. Over the next few days, things took a sharp turn for the worse. Malik was summoned to the dean's office. An event that made his stomach twist in dread. The dean, Dr. Harper, was a man known for his cold, pragmatic approach to any situation. He had built his career on maintaining order and discipline, and Malik had heard rumors that he was fiercely protective of the university's reputation. Malik, Dr. Harper said as Malik entered the office, his voice carrying an air of authority, this has gone far enough. The tension in the room was palpable. Malik could feel the weight of Dr. Harper's gaze as the dean folded his hands on the desk in front of him. I've reviewed the situation, Dr. Harper continued. You've made accusations against one of our most respected professors, and the administration is beginning to question your intentions. You're a promising student, but your actions are threatening the reputation of this institution. Malik opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Harper raised a hand, silencing him. I'm not here to discuss the mathematics. I'm here to make it clear that your conduct is under review, the dean said, his voice cold. The university has standards, Malik, and I suggest you adhere to them if you want to continue your studies here. Malik felt the floor drop out from beneath him. They were trying to intimidate him, to force him into silence. But there was no turning back. He had already chosen his side, and no amount of pressure could make him back down. I'll stand by my work, Malik said, his voice unwavering. I'm not going to let someone's reputation blind me to the truth. The dean's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. I see. Well, you'll have to live with the consequences, Malik. The university may not be able to continue supporting you if this continues. As Malik left the office, the weight of the threat hung heavily on his shoulders. But he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Dr. Whitaker and the administration, force him into submission. Days turned into weeks, and Malik found himself under increasing scrutiny. His classmates, once friendly and eager to engage in intellectual debate, now avoided him. The once thriving community at Bright Futures had fractured, with whispers of his challenge to Whitaker circulating through the hallways like a contagion. And then came the official notice. Malik received an email from the university administration, informing him that he was being placed on academic probation. The email cited disruptive behavior and failure to adhere to the university's code of conduct, but Malik knew the real reason. He was being punished for challenging the institution's hierarchy. The notification was a blow, but it wasn't the end. It was only a step in their efforts to silence him. But Malik wasn't about to give up. He had already proven that his theory was solid, and now, more than ever, he needed to push forward. He contacted Dr. Hayes and the other mathematicians who had been supporting him. They rallied around him, offering words of encouragement and reaffirming their commitment to his cause. We're with you, Malik, Dr. Hayes had said during one of their calls. What you're doing is bigger than any one person. The truth needs to come out, and we'll help you make sure it does. Malik didn't know how much longer he could endure the mounting pressure. His life at the university was unraveling, and every step he took seemed to put him further at odds with the very institution that was supposed to nurture his growth. But he knew one thing for certain, he would not let the fear of failure or retaliation stop him from exposing the truth. The higher they pushed him, the harder he would rise. Malik had a voice, and he would use it to make sure that the flaws in Whittaker's theorem were heard. It wasn't just about his future, it was about the integrity of the entire field of mathematics. And with that thought, Malik made his decision. He would take the next step. Malik knew he had crossed a line. The university had placed him on academic probation, and his future at Bright Futures hung in the balance. But despite the official notice, despite the warnings and the veiled threats, Malik couldn't stop himself. His discovery was too important. The truth was too significant. He was no longer just fighting for his own academic future, he was fighting for the integrity of a field he loved. Over the next few days, Malik prepared for the next phase of his plan. He couldn't back down now. The administration's pressure would only increase, but he knew the consequences of staying silent would be even worse. This wasn't just about a flawed theorem anymore, it was about exposing a system that rewarded conformity over curiosity, loyalty over truth. Dr. Hayes had been working behind the scenes to help him organize a series of private meetings with key figures in the world of mathematics. These were individuals with the power to amplify Malik's voice. Some were already familiar with his work, others were intrigued by the claims of a young student daring to take on an established academic giant like Professor Whittaker. Malik had spent hours preparing, reviewing his findings, rehearsing his presentation, and refining his arguments. He had already proven his case to a handful of experts, now, it was time to show the world. One evening, after an intense revision session, Malik sat alone in his small apartment. The weight of the world felt like it was on his shoulders. He opened his laptop, staring at the email he had drafted for Dr. Hayes. It was a carefully worded invitation to a symposium, a gathering of the most brilliant minds in mathematics. This would be his moment to go public. Malik would present his findings to the world, and there was no turning back. Subject, Invitation, a critical review of Professor Whittaker's theorem. Dear Dr. Hayes, I hope this email finds you well. As we've discussed, I believe it's time to take the next step in addressing the flaws in Professor Whittaker's theorem. I would like to invite you and our colleagues to a private symposium where I will present my findings, including the gaps and inconsistencies I've discovered. This will be an opportunity to have a rigorous, open discussion about the implications of my work and its potential impact on our field. I trust you'll agree that this is a conversation that must happen, one that cannot be delayed any longer. Best regards. Malik Parker. He hit send, and sat back, trying to breathe through the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. This was it, the start of the reckoning. The days following his email were a whirlwind of preparation. Dr. Hayes was quick to respond, securing a time and place for the symposium. She was as committed as Malik was, and her support had been unwavering. Other mathematicians who had been following Malik's progress began to respond with interest, offering their own time and resources to help facilitate the event. It was happening. The moment Malik had been building toward was finally coming. But as the date of the symposium loomed closer, the pressure from the university grew more intense. Malik's phone buzzed one morning with a notification from his advisor, Dr. Lee. Malik, the administration is pressing me to advise you to abandon your actions. Please think carefully about the consequences of what you're doing. This isn't just about your future. It's about your reputation in the academic community as a whole. I strongly urge you to reconsider your next steps. Malik stared at the screen for a moment. He had already heard these arguments, over and over again, but they were losing their power. The truth was something he could no longer ignore, no matter how high the cost. His reputation. He'd already risked that. His future. He was willing to sacrifice it if it meant making this discovery known. He typed a response, his fingers steady despite the gravity of the situation. Dr. Lee, I appreciate your concern. But I cannot let this go. I'm not doing this for myself, I'm doing it for the integrity of mathematics. If that means risking everything, then so be it. I cannot back down. He sent the message and then, for a moment, allowed himself to sit in silence. The path was set. There was no turning back now. The day of the symposium arrived, and Malik felt a knot of nerves tighten in his stomach. The event would be held in a quiet, private conference room in a building away from the main campus, far from prying eyes. Only a handful of mathematicians would be present, but each of them held significant weight in the field. These were the people who could help turn the tide. Malik arrived early, setting up his materials and reviewing his notes one final time. Dr. Hayes arrived soon after, followed by Dr. Sanchez, the European professor who had been one of Malik's earliest supporters. Dr. Sanchez gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this," she said quietly. "The truth is on your side." Malik nodded, though the nerves were still there. He had prepared for this, but now that the moment was upon him, he realized just how much was riding on it. This wasn't just a presentation, it was his defense. The future of his career, and the integrity of the mathematical world, rested in these moments. As the other mathematicians began to filter into the room, Malik's heart raced. They were all here because of him, because they wanted to hear what he had to say. This wasn't just about a flawed theorem, it was about something bigger. It was about standing up against an entrenched system that prioritized power and reputation over truth. Malik took his seat at the front of the room, his laptop open and ready. He was about to present his findings that could change the course of mathematics forever. Dr. Hayes stood to introduce him, her voice calm and steady. "Thank you all for coming today. Malik has made a discovery that could shake the foundations of our understanding in a critical area of mathematics. I ask that you all listen carefully and consider the evidence he will present. This is not just a discussion about a flaw in a theorem, it's about the future of mathematics itself." Malik stood, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted his notes. But as he looked around the room at the faces before him, people who, just months ago, had been nothing more than distant names on a page, he felt a surge of determination. This was his moment. And so, he began. The room was silent as Malik clicked through his slides. The mathematicians around him, some familiar faces, some strangers, watched intently, their eyes fixed on the screen. Every detail of his presentation had been carefully planned, the math, the logic, the visuals. His hands, now steady, moved confidently as he guided them through his findings, showing step by step how the core assumptions of Professor Whittaker's theorem were flawed. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was pounding. Here, we see that Whittaker's model assumes that x and y variables are independent. However, by applying a more refined analysis of z, Malik paused, clicking to the next slide, we can see that these variables interact in a way Whittaker failed to account for. This alters the underlying structure of the theorem significantly. There was a murmur in the room as his audience absorbed what he was saying. Malik had anticipated this, he knew his proof was sound. But now, as the moment of truth arrived, he could feel the tension building. Some of the faces in the room were skeptical, others were deeply intrigued. He could tell that they were waiting for him to either confirm their doubts or win them over entirely. Dr. Sanchez, a professor from Europe who had been one of the earliest supporters of his work, raised her hand. "Malik, what you're suggesting would essentially change how we view this entire category of theorems. Are you sure the error you're identifying is as fundamental as you're claiming?" Malik nodded, his voice confident. "Yes, Dr. Sanchez. I've run multiple simulations and applied several independent checks. The mistake is real, and it's systemic. Whittaker's theorem is built on a shaky foundation." Dr. Hayes, who had been quietly sitting in the back, now stood up. Her face was neutral, but her eyes sparkled with a mix of pride and concern. "I've reviewed the work as well. I stand by Malik's findings," she said, her voice firm. "This is a breakthrough." The room went silent for a moment, and Malik felt a rush of relief wash over him. He had done it, he had presented his case, and someone of Dr. Hayes's stature had publicly vouched for him. But that relief was short-lived. Professor Mitchell, a senior faculty member known for his close ties to Professor Whitaker, stood up with a sharp intake of breath. "This is nonsense," he snapped, his voice laced with disdain. "You're telling me that a theorem that's been accepted and revered for decades has been wrong all along? By a student who's barely a sophomore? This reeks of arrogance, not mathematical discovery." Malik's stomach twisted. Professor Mitchell had always been a figure to be wary of, powerful, influential, and notoriously protective of his colleagues. The fact that he was now challenging Malik so directly was no surprise. What did surprise him, however, was the venom in Mitchell's tone. "I'm not here to challenge Whitaker personally," Malik said, keeping his voice even. "I'm here to challenge a theorem that's been proven to be flawed. The math doesn't lie. You think that you can just waltz in here, as a student, and tear down years of academic rigor because you've had a new idea?" Mitchell shot back, his words like daggers. "You're disrupting the entire field for what? A few months of work?" Malik felt his pulse quicken, but he held his ground. "I'm not asking for you to blindly accept it. I'm asking for the truth to be examined. If my findings are wrong, let them be proven wrong. But if they're right, they deserve to be acknowledged." The room was silent once again, the air thick with tension. Malik could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on him, the disbelief, the suspicion, the admiration, all swirling together into an inescapable storm. Dr. Sanchez leaned forward, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I've reviewed the proof as well, and I don't think you're making an exaggerated claim. We need to test this further, yes, but dismissing Malik's work outright is dangerous. It could set us back decades." Professor Mitchell opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Hayes cut him off, her voice sharp. "This isn't the way to approach new ideas in science. Challenging the established order is what drives us forward. If Malik's discovery is as valid as it seems, then it's our responsibility to explore it, not bury it." There was a tense pause, and for a moment, it seemed like the room was on the verge of erupting into a full-blown argument. But then Malik spoke again, his voice softer now, but just as resolute. "Look," he said, turning to address everyone in the room. "I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it. I'm not asking you to just accept what I've presented. What I'm asking is that we stop pretending that what's been done is perfect. Science, mathematics, specifically, is about asking questions, not holding on to things simply because they've been accepted for a long time. If Whitaker's theorem is wrong, then it needs to be corrected. That's how progress happens." The tension in the room was palpable. The battle lines had been drawn, and Malik knew that the next few moments would determine his fate, not just at the university, but in the world of mathematics. He could feel the weight of history pushing down on him. The system he was challenging was old and entrenched, and it would not go down easily. But as he looked around at the faces of the other mathematicians, those who had supported him, those who were still skeptical, he felt a sense of clarity. He had done everything he could to prove the validity of his work. The rest was up to them. Dr. Hayes, who had remained silent for the duration of the argument, now stood once more. "We will not let this go. We will investigate this fully, in accordance with academic integrity. Professor Whitaker may have his influence, but truth has its own power, and that power is not to be dismissed so easily." Malik's breath caught in his chest. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a small step in the right direction. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, Malik felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The room slowly began to clear, the debate still simmering in the air. As the other mathematicians filtered out, Malik remained behind with Dr. Hayes and Dr. Sanchez. They gave him encouraging nods, their quiet smiles speaking volumes. "You did well," Dr. Hayes said softly. Malik nodded, but his mind was already racing. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. He had made his case, and now, he had to see it through. "Thanks," Malik replied. "But this is just the beginning." The next few days after the symposium felt like a blur. Malik had braced himself for backlash, but nothing could prepare him for the full force of what came next. The university's reaction was swift, almost brutal. It started with an email, official and cold, from the dean's office. Malik was summoned to meet with Dean Thomas to discuss his recent actions, particularly his challenge to the established academic orthodoxy. The email was clear: the university was not pleased with his public confrontation of Professor Whitaker's work. Malik felt a cold knot in his stomach as he read it, the weight of what was coming settling heavily on his shoulders. His phone buzzed moments later, Dr. Lee's name flashing across the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Malik, Dr. Lee's voice was tight, restrained. "I've been told you're meeting with the dean today. They've already informed me of the situation. Look, I know you think you're doing the right thing, but you have to understand, you've made a powerful enemy. The university won't let this go easily." Malik leaned against the wall of his apartment, trying to steady his breathing. "I don't care about making enemies, Dr. Lee. This isn't about me. It's about the truth." Dr. Lee sighed, a long, weary sound. "I understand. I really do. But this is bigger than you. This is about politics, about influence. You've put yourself in a position where the stakes are too high for them to just let it go. I just want you to be careful. Please." Malik bit back the frustration building in his chest. "I am careful. But I can't stay silent anymore. I found something that's wrong. I have to do something about it." Dr. Lee was quiet for a moment. "I wish I could be more supportive of you, but I have to warn you, be prepared. There will be consequences." Before Malik could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, the unease sinking deeper. It felt like his world was closing in on him. Every move he made, every step he took, seemed to bring him closer to a precipice he wasn't sure he could climb back from. Later that day, Malik walked to the dean's office, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the door, he hesitated, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. Dean Thomas was seated behind his desk, his stern gaze locked on Malik the moment he entered. "Sit down, Malik," the dean said, his voice even but firm. Malik took a seat across from him, his hands clasped tightly together. The silence stretched between them for a moment, and then the dean spoke again. "We've had several discussions with Professor Whitaker regarding your claims. While we acknowledge that you've presented your findings, the manner in which you've gone about this, publicly challenging one of our most esteemed professors, is both reckless and irresponsible." Malik's jaw tightened. "I didn't do this to attack anyone personally. I did it because the theorem is wrong. No one should be above scrutiny." Dean Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples as though the conversation was more trouble than it was worth. "You may believe that, but you've forgotten that your actions have consequences. Do you realize how damaging this is for the reputation of this university? For the reputation of mathematics as a whole? You're a student, Malik. A student. And you've taken it upon yourself to publicly undermine the work of a senior professor." Malik didn't flinch. He had heard these arguments before. They were about power, not about truth. "I didn't undermine anyone. I found a flaw. A flaw that should have been addressed years ago. You can't let something like this stand just because it's inconvenient." The dean leaned forward, his voice lowering, almost threatening. "I'll tell you this once, Malik, if you continue down this path, you'll ruin your academic career before it even begins. You'll never be taken seriously in this field again. This kind of rebellion doesn't end well for students, and it certainly won't end well for you." Malik's heart raced, but he refused to back down. He'd come this far, and there was no going back. "I'd rather be a student with integrity than a graduate with a lie on my record," he said, his voice steady, though inside, his thoughts were racing. Dean Thomas paused, studying Malik's face. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The weight of the conversation settled heavily around them, the tension palpable. Then, the dean spoke again, his tone more controlled. "I've spoken to several of your professors. They are concerned, Malik. This is not just about you anymore. It's about the reputation of the entire department. You're putting us all in a difficult position." Malik's mind raced. He knew what the dean was implying: if he didn't back down, the university would make his life a nightmare. They could pull his funding, revoke his academic standing, or worse, expel him. He had seen it happen to other students who dared to challenge the system. But despite the fear gnawing at him, Malik stood his ground. "Then I guess I'll have to live with the consequences. But I won't stop. I can't. Not when the truth is at stake." Dean Thomas regarded him for a long moment, and Malik couldn't tell what the older man was thinking. Finally, the dean sighed deeply. "We'll see how this plays out, Malik. But I want to be clear. If this continues, we may have no choice but to take more drastic measures." With that, the conversation ended. Malik stood up, his legs a little shaky, but his resolve stronger than ever. He left the dean's office feeling the weight of the university's threat on his shoulders, but also a growing sense of determination. They wanted him to back down, to apologize, to disappear into the background. But that was not going to happen. Malik sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. There had been no further updates from the university. But the messages from his friends and supporters had been pouring in. He opened one from Dr. Sanchez, her words short but supportive. "Don't back down. What you've done is important, and we're with you." And then another from Dr. Hayes. "I know you're under pressure, Malik. But you're doing the right thing. Keep fighting. We'll help you." For the first time in days, Malik felt a flicker of hope. The battle was just beginning, and while the university's power seemed insurmountable, he wasn't alone in this fight. There were people who believed in him, who saw the truth of what he was doing. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't just about a flawed theorem anymore, it was about the future of academia, about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. And Malik was ready. He would not back down. The next few weeks felt like a never-ending cycle of tension and conflict. Malik was no longer just a student trying to make a name for himself in the world of mathematics. He had become a symbol, whether he liked it or not, of resistance against the entrenched powers at the university. It wasn't just the dean or Professor Whitaker anymore. The pressure was coming from all sides: faculty members, students, even people outside the university who had heard about the controversy. And Malik, despite his resolve, could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. It started small. Whispered conversations in the hallways, students giving him strange looks when they passed him in the library. At first, he thought it was just the usual tension that came with challenging something as monumental as Whitaker's theorem. But soon, it escalated. Emails flooded his inbox, some supportive, most critical, many filled with venom. Faculty members, once friendly, now avoided him, making it clear with their silence that they had chosen sides. The worst came when a letter arrived one morning, addressed to him personally. It was from the Department of Mathematics. "Dear Malik Carter. After careful review of your recent actions and public statements, we regret to inform you that your academic standing is being re-evaluated. Your actions have caused a significant disruption to the department, and your continued enrollment in this program is now under review. We request that you meet with the department head to discuss the next steps." Malik stared at the letter, his heart sinking into his stomach. His immediate thought was that this was it, the university was finally going to throw him out. The words, "under review," were a thinly veiled threat, a warning that his future at the school was uncertain at best. He could feel the walls closing in. The battle wasn't just with Whitaker or the university anymore, it was a fight for his future, his career, and his very place in academia. Later that day, Malik met with Dr. Hayes and Dr. Sanchez in the quiet corner of the university's coffee shop. Both women looked concerned, though their expressions were determined, as if they had anticipated this. "They're moving quickly," Dr. Hayes said, her voice low. "The administration is building a case against you. They're using every piece of this scandal to discredit your work." Malik took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his coffee cup. "I knew this was coming. But I don't know what to do anymore. I'm stuck in the middle of this mess, and I feel like no matter what I do, I'm going to lose." Dr. Sanchez's gaze softened. "Malik, we're all behind you. You can't back down now. If you do, everything you've fought for will be in vain." "But I can't do this alone," Malik admitted, his voice thick with frustration. "The pressure is too much. They're pulling every string they can to isolate me. The department is starting to turn on me. I can feel it." Dr. Hayes leaned in closer, her expression serious. "We need to make sure the faculty knows this isn't just about you. This is about the integrity of mathematics. If they can discredit you, they can discredit the work itself. The truth has to come out." Malik nodded, the weight of their words sinking in. He couldn't afford to back down. If he did, the theorem would continue to be revered as if it were untouchable. He had uncovered a flaw that no one else had been able to see, and the world of mathematics needed to know. "What do we do now?" Malik asked, determination in his voice. "We go public," Dr. Sanchez said. "We find a platform where you can present your findings. You need to show the world that what you've discovered is real. You have to take the fight outside the walls of this university." The thought of going public terrified Malik. He knew that once he stepped outside the controlled environment of academia, there would be no turning back. The backlash would be immense, but Dr. Sanchez and Dr. Hayes were right. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. As the days passed, Malik worked tirelessly on refining his proof. He had already sent a draft of his findings to several journals, but the university's efforts to block his work had made it difficult to gain traction. He knew that he needed to take a different route. The decision was made one evening when Malik sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop. He had been poring over his work for hours when he saw it, a live-stream debate about academic integrity that was scheduled to take place at an upcoming international conference. The panelists were renowned figures in mathematics, and the topic was a hot one, challenging the canon. When should long-held beliefs be questioned? This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Malik contacted the organizers immediately, sending them an email with a brief description of his findings and a request to present. It felt like a desperate move, but in that moment, he realized there was no other option. If he wanted to make an impact, he had to take the risk. Within a few days, he received a reply. The organizers had reviewed his proposal, and though they were initially skeptical, they offered him a slot in the debate. Malik knew this was a gamble. If he did this wrong, his reputation would be shattered beyond repair. But if he succeeded, he would have the world's attention. The night before the debate, he could hardly sleep. His mind raced with equations, counterarguments, and the fear of rejection. But as he lay in bed, trying to calm his nerves, he remembered something Dr. Hayes had told him: the truth doesn't wait for anyone. It doesn't care how afraid you are. It demands to be heard. Malik had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The next morning, he dressed in his best suit, gathered his notes, and left for the conference, his stomach a knot of nerves and excitement. The world was watching, and Malik was ready to show them that his discovery was not just a flaw, it was a revolution. The debate room was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Malik stood at the back, watching the other panelists take their seats. He was the youngest in the room by far, his presence marked by the tense energy that radiated from the older, more experienced scholars. As the session began, Malik took his turn, presenting his proof with a calm precision that belied the anxiety he felt inside. His slides flashed on the screen behind him, showing the systematic breakdown of Whittaker's theorem and the evidence of the flaw that had evaded so many others. The reactions were immediate. Some panelists seemed skeptical, others intrigued, but there was no denying the gravity of what Malik had uncovered. The tension in the room was palpable as the debate intensified. Malik didn't back down. He stood his ground, challenging every critique, defending his work with facts and logic. And as the discussion grew more heated, he realized something important. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about showing the world that the truth mattered more than reputation or prestige. By the end of the debate, Malik had made his mark. The room was buzzing with excitement, the conversation swirling around his findings. It was clear, Malik had taken a giant step forward in his fight, but the battle was far from over. The days after the debate felt like a whirlwind of tension and unexpected consequences. Malik had anticipated the fallout, but nothing could have prepared him for the scope of what was to come. The conference had given his work a global platform, but it had also opened a door to a storm of backlash from which there would be no easy escape. Malik's phone buzzed incessantly for days after the event. News outlets, academic journals, and mathematicians from around the world reached out to him, some with admiration, others with disdain. His inbox was flooded with messages. Some congratulating him, some attacking him for daring to question Whittaker's theorem. Yet the most significant reactions came from the university, where his discovery had not only upset the academic community but also disrupted the political equilibrium within the institution. It didn't take long for the university's administration to strike back. Malik received another email from the department head, requesting a formal meeting, followed by a notice about a disciplinary hearing scheduled for the following week. The tone of the email was clear: the university was taking serious measures to address what it referred to as a breach of academic protocol. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him again. The university had been caught off guard by the public nature of his challenge, and now they were determined to make an example out of him. In the days leading up to the hearing, Malik couldn't focus. The pressure mounted in all aspects of his life. He was no longer just a student. He had become a symbol of rebellion, of defiance against a system that had long maintained its power through control and silence. But with that title came a price. He barely had time to process everything before the personal consequences began to surface. His phone rang one evening, and it was his mother's name flashing on the screen. Malik hesitated for a moment, the weight of the conversation he knew was coming hanging in the air. When he answered, his mother's voice was tight, cautious. "Malik, your grandmother called me today. She's heard about what's going on at the university. She's worried, honey. She doesn't want you to be involved in all this mess." Malik ran a hand through his hair, feeling the familiar rush of guilt. He could hear the concern in his mother's voice, and it tore at him. "Mom, I can't just drop it. This is bigger than me. You know that." "I know, baby," she replied softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I also know how hard it's been for you. You've always felt like you had to prove something. But you've been working so hard, and now, this. It's not worth losing yourself over." Her words hit him harder than he cared to admit. Malik had been so focused on his mission, on the truth he had uncovered, that he hadn't stopped to consider the toll it was taking on the people who loved him. His mother, his family, they were part of this, too, and yet he hadn't realized how much his fight had affected them. "I'll be okay, Mom," he said, trying to sound reassuring, though the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. "But I can't stop now. I just can't." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I know. Just, please be careful." Malik swallowed hard, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. The path he had chosen was one of isolation. The support he had once felt from his professors, his friends, even his own family, was starting to feel more like a distant memory. He was beginning to see just how lonely this battle had become. The day of the disciplinary hearing arrived sooner than he had expected. Malik had spent the last few days preparing himself for what he would face. He had meticulously organized his findings, reviewed the data, and practiced his arguments. But nothing could have prepared him for the overwhelming sense of dread that washed over him as he walked into the sterile, intimidating room. The university had assembled a panel of senior faculty members, all of whom were already set against him. Malik recognized several of them from his classes, and his stomach churned at the thought of their judgment. At the far end of the room sat Dean Thomas, his face grim and unreadable. Professor Whitaker was also present, his eyes narrowed with a thinly veiled sense of disdain. It was clear that the man would do everything in his power to discredit Malik and his work. Mr. Carter, the chair of the panel, Professor Larson, began in a cold, authoritative tone. "We've called you here today to discuss your recent actions regarding Professor Whitaker's theorem. As you are well aware, your actions have caused significant disruption to the university's reputation and academic standing." Malik sat up straighter, doing his best to mask the nervous tension in his body. "I didn't mean to cause any disruption," he replied, his voice steady. I found a mistake. A flaw in the theorem that had been overlooked for decades." There was a murmur of disbelief from the panel. Professor Whitaker, who had been silent until now, leaned forward in his chair. "A flaw?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "You're suggesting that after all these years, after all the scrutiny my work has undergone, a student like you has somehow discovered something that no one else has?" Malik met his gaze, refusing to back down. "Yes. I've proven it, and I have the evidence." The panel members exchanged glances, and Malik could see their skepticism mounting. This was no longer just about the theorem, it was about his credibility. They didn't want to believe him. They couldn't afford to. The implications of his discovery were too great. "You understand, Mr. Carter," Dean Thomas interjected, his voice stern, "that if you are unable to provide sufficient proof of your claims, this could result in serious consequences, including academic suspension or even expulsion." Malik felt his pulse quicken, but he refused to show any signs of fear. "I understand," he said, though his mind was racing. This was his moment. If he couldn't convince them now, it would all be over. The hearing dragged on for hours. Malik presented his evidence, his findings, his proof, but the panel seemed intent on poking holes in his argument, dismissing his work as the reckless actions of an overzealous student. Every question they asked felt like an attempt to tear him down, to discredit him in front of the very people he had once looked up to. And then, just as the hearing seemed to be coming to an end, something unexpected happened. Professor Whitaker spoke up, his voice more measured than before. "I've reviewed Mr. Carter's work," he said slowly. "And while I still don't agree with his conclusions, I must admit, there is something here. I don't know if it's a flaw in my theorem, but I cannot deny that the work he's done warrants further investigation." Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the first crack in the facade, the first sign that maybe, just maybe, the truth was starting to break through. The hearing concluded with no immediate decision. The panel promised to review Malik's work further and come to a conclusion within a week. But as he left the room, a strange sense of hope bubbled inside him. He hadn't won yet, but he had made his case. For the first time in weeks, Malik felt like there was a chance. As he walked out of the building, he received a message from Dr. Hayes. "Don't let them intimidate you. Keep fighting. You're on the right path." And then another from Dr. Sanchez. "We're proud of you, Malik. You're showing the world that the truth is worth the fight." It wasn't much, but in that moment, it was enough. The week after the disciplinary hearing felt like a suffocating haze. Malik could barely focus on anything other than the looming decision that would determine his future at the university, and perhaps even his future in mathematics altogether. The uncertainty gnawed at him, kept him up at night, and made every moment feel heavier than the last. But through it all, something had changed inside him. He had finally started to believe that no matter what the outcome, he was in control of his own fate. The university had given him 1 week to present any further evidence, if he could. His discovery had cracked open the doors to something monumental, but now it felt as though the world was trying to slam them shut. No matter how many times Malik told himself to stay calm, the pressure continued to build. He spent hours each day refining his work, checking the math, preparing for whatever came next. But each time he found a new angle, the voices in his head, voices of doubt, of professors who didn't believe him, of students who called him reckless, would echo louder, demanding that he prove himself once again. The hardest part wasn't the math. It wasn't the long hours, or the sleepless nights spent staring at his equations, trying to untangle the complex threads that had led him to his conclusion. It was the weight of being an outsider. Malik had always known that as a black man in a predominantly white academic world, he would face challenges that others might not. But now, those challenges felt like insurmountable walls. Malik sat in his small apartment one evening, gazing out at the city skyline. His phone buzzed again. A text message from Dr. Hayes. "Any updates?" He sighed and quickly typed back, "Not yet. It's been a tough week." Dr. Hayes' reply was swift. "Remember, you're not alone. You've got this. Whatever happens, you've already done something extraordinary." Malik smiled, a small comfort in the midst of everything. He needed to hear that. Dr. Hayes had been a constant source of support, someone who had believed in him when no one else had. But he couldn't ignore the fact that the rest of the world, the faculty, his peers, the administration, was against him. And the closer he got to the final decision, the more it felt like the weight of their collective doubt was pushing him down, threatening to crush him under its enormity. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Malik received the call. He was sitting at his desk, his notes scattered across the table, the equations on his computer screen half finished. His phone buzzed, and for a split second, he hesitated. But deep down, he already knew what was coming. The voice on the other end was familiar, but the tone was colder than it had been before. "Mr. Carter, this is Dean Thomas," came the voice from the other end. "We have reviewed your case thoroughly and have come to a final decision. I'd like you to come to my office to discuss it in person." Malik's stomach sank. "When?" "Immediately." Malik stood up, his legs shaky beneath him. The conversation had been brief, almost mechanical, as if the dean was already prepared to deliver his verdict. He grabbed his coat, his mind racing with 100 possible outcomes. What would they say? What would the consequences be? The rain pattered against the windows as he made his way across campus, the path to the dean's office feeling longer than ever. As he entered the building, his heart pounded in his chest. He was no longer just a student, he was a symbol of defiance, a challenge to the status quo. And now, he was about to find out whether that defiance would be his undoing. When he reached Dean Thomas's office, he was ushered in without a word. The dean sat behind his desk, flanked by Professor Whitaker and a few other faculty members Malik didn't recognize. The room was silent as they motioned for him to sit. Malik's breath was heavy as he took a seat. He could feel the eyes of the professors on him, their expressions unreadable. They had all been part of the decision-making process. This was it, the moment where everything he had worked for would either crumble or solidify into something unshakable. Dean Thomas cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, after reviewing the evidence you've presented, we've come to a conclusion." Malik's hands gripped the arms of the chair, his pulse quickening. He had prepared himself for this moment, but the reality of it was still overwhelming. "We've decided to grant you an extension," Dean Thomas continued, his voice carefully neutral. "You will be allowed to present your findings to the full faculty at the next academic meeting. However, there will be strict conditions. You will also be required to work closely with a faculty advisor to ensure that your findings meet the necessary academic standards." Malik blinked, processing what he had just heard. An extension? A chance to present his findings in front of the entire faculty? The gravity of the decision was sinking in, but it wasn't quite what he had expected. However, Dean Thomas added, his tone growing colder, "If, after presenting your work to the faculty, the consensus is that your conclusions are not supported, you will face serious consequences, including the possibility of academic suspension." Malik's mind spun. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a complete validation of his work either. It was a gamble. They were giving him a chance, but the stakes were high. One misstep, one crack in his argument, and everything could come crashing down. "Do you understand the conditions, Mr. Carter?" Dean Thomas asked, his gaze sharp. Malik nodded slowly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. "Yes, I understand." Dean Thomas stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You have 1 week to prepare. We'll notify you of the date for the faculty meeting soon. I suggest you use this time wisely." As Malik left the office, the weight of the decision settled heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a flicker of hope. He had been given a chance to prove himself, to show that what he had uncovered wasn't just a mistake, it was a truth that could reshape the foundation of mathematics. The next week passed in a blur. Malik dove into his work with renewed determination, knowing that this was his last chance to convince the academic world that his discovery was not just valid, but revolutionary. He worked day and night, revising his proof, preparing his arguments, practicing his presentation. But the pressure was unlike anything he had ever felt before. Every time he found a new angle to his work, he was struck by the fear that it wouldn't be enough. The eyes of the academic community would be upon him, waiting for him to slip up. And if he did, it would all be over. Late one night, Malik received another message from Dr. Hayes. "How's it going? We're rooting for you, Malik. Don't forget, this is your moment. You've already done something no one thought possible." Malik stared at the message, the words sinking in. This is your moment. He had come so far, but now was the time to prove that it had all been worth it. As the days passed, he found himself more and more immersed in his work, pushing aside the fears and doubts that had plagued him. With each passing hour, the man who had once felt small and out of place in the academic world was beginning to believe in his own power. It wasn't just about the math anymore. It was about his journey, his struggle to be heard, to be seen. And he was ready to stand in front of the entire faculty and say, "This is my truth." The day of the faculty meeting had arrived. Malik stood in front of a mirror in his small apartment, adjusting his tie for the third time. His reflection looked back at him, a man on the edge of something monumental, though he didn't know yet whether it would be a triumph or a disaster. His palms were sweating, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. The culmination of all the sleepless nights, the months of self-doubt, the endless hours spent perfecting his argument. He had been given one last chance. One final opportunity to prove that his discovery wasn't a fluke. One moment to show that the world of mathematics was capable of change, that even a young black student like him could make an impact. But with that opportunity came a terrifying truth: if he failed, he would be nothing more than a cautionary tale. He would be remembered as the one who dared to challenge the established order, and lost. As he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door, he could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. He knew what was at stake. The thought of standing in front of the entire faculty, explaining his work to a room full of skeptics, some of whom had already made up their minds, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But there was no turning back now. Malik had fought too hard to be silenced. The room was filled with the hum of quiet conversations as Malik entered. His heart seemed to thud louder with each step he took toward the front of the room. There were at least 50 faculty members seated, all watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. His eyes briefly scanned the room, landing on the familiar faces of Professor Whitaker and Dean Thomas, both seated at the head of the table. They didn't look pleased to see him, but he didn't expect them to. He knew they were hoping for him to fail, to make a mistake that would justify their previous criticisms. He took a deep breath, setting his laptop and papers down on the table. His mind briefly flashed to the conversation with his mother the night before, when she had wished him luck and reminded him to stay strong. Malik knew this was his moment. He wasn't just fighting for validation anymore, he was fighting for respect. He was fighting for the chance to change how people saw him, how they saw his work, and how they saw the potential of someone like him. Dean Thomas stood and cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "As per the agreement, you have the floor. You have 30 minutes to present your findings. Please proceed." Malik nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he opened his laptop and started his presentation. The room fell silent, and he could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him. He started with the basics, an introduction to Whittaker's theorem, the long-standing belief that had shaped the field for decades. As he spoke, Malik tried to steady his voice, to keep his nerves in check. He walked the audience through the mathematical equations, explaining his own discovery, the flaw in the theorem that had eluded everyone for so long. He had painstakingly worked through every possible angle, ensuring that his proof was airtight, that it could stand up to scrutiny. But as he spoke, he could sense the skepticism growing in the room. Some of the faculty members exchanged looks, whispering to one another. He knew it wasn't easy to challenge a legend. Whittaker's theorem had been revered, and the idea that a young student could find a flaw in such a respected work was hard for many to accept. Still, Malik pressed on, his passion for the truth driving him forward. As he reached the most complex part of his argument, a professor in the back raised his hand. "Mr. Carter," the man said, "I don't see how you can claim this is a flaw in Whittaker's theorem. Your proof seems, how should I put it, unconventional. It doesn't follow the standard protocols for verification. How can we trust that your work is legitimate?" Malik's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment he had feared, when someone would call his work into question, forcing him to defend himself in a way that would feel like a last stand. He took a breath and faced the man. "I understand your concerns," Malik said, his voice steady despite the pressure. "But I've followed every protocol I could find. I've double-checked my work, and I've even worked with a few peers to ensure that my findings are sound. This isn't just theory anymore, it's been proven through rigorous methods. I'm not asking you to believe me just because I say so, I'm showing you the evidence." There was a pause in the room as the professor considered his words. Malik continued, moving on to explain how the flaw in the theorem could alter the way the field approached certain calculations. He wasn't just challenging an idea, he was suggesting a new framework, one that could change the very way mathematicians understood the problem at its core. As Malik presented the final section of his work, the room grew quieter. For the first time, he noticed that not all the faces were skeptical. Some of the faculty members were leaning forward, listening intently, their expressions thoughtful. The coldness in the room seemed to shift, just a little. And then, as he wrapped up his presentation, something unexpected happened. Professor Whittaker raised his hand. Malik's heart stopped. The professor had been silent for most of the presentation, watching with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Now, he was speaking. "I have to admit," Whittaker said, his voice measured, "I still don't fully agree with Mr. Carter's conclusions. But I can't deny that the evidence he's presented is worth examining further. I will not deny that there is a possibility that his findings could lead to new insights." The room was silent, and Malik could feel the weight of the moment. He had just received a grudging acknowledgement from the man whose work he had challenged. But it wasn't just about Whittaker's opinion, it was the fact that the room was beginning to shift, to entertain the possibility that he might be right. Dean Thomas cleared his throat again. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he said. "We will take your presentation under consideration and will let you know the outcome shortly. You've given us much to think about." Malik nodded, trying to hide the relief flooding through him. The meeting ended, but as he walked out of the room, he couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had made his case. He had fought for his work. And he had earned the respect of at least some of the people who had once doubted him. The next few days were a blur of waiting. Malik couldn't concentrate on anything else. Every moment was spent wondering what the faculty would decide, whether they would accept his work as valid or dismiss it as the misguided effort of an overzealous student. The suspense was unbearable. Finally, the email came. It was brief, but the words inside were enough to make Malik's heart race. Mr. Carter, after careful consideration, the faculty has decided to accept your findings. Your work will be published in the university's journal, and you will be given full credit for your discovery. Congratulations on your remarkable achievement. Malik stared at the email in disbelief, the words swimming before his eyes. He had done it. He had proven himself. His discovery was real, and it was going to change the world of mathematics forever. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his life, Malik Carter felt like he had truly earned his place in the world. Malik stood on the stage at the annual University Award ceremony, receiving an honorary plaque for his work. The room was filled with applause, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had proven the world wrong. He had shown that his voice mattered, that his discoveries were worth hearing. And in doing so, he had become something more than just a student. He had become a symbol of perseverance, of fighting against the odds, of never backing down. As he looked out over the audience, his eyes found Dr. Hayes, who was smiling proudly from the back of the room. Malik knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt like he was ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?